So here the first thing we notice is that we have a trig function raised to an exponent. So I always like to rewrite that as what it actually is. We have cosine pi x. Remember, whether we have parentheses around one term for the argument does not matter. And then raised to the third power. So that is our y. Now, once we rewrite it, and again, you could put the little parentheses here if you wanted to and continue that way. But once you rewrite it, the first thing to notice is that you have parentheses to a power. And so that means we are going to use our general power rule. All right, so our y prime will be equal to, bring down the exponent, keep the inside fixed, subtract 1 from the exponent of 2, and then we have to multiply this by the derivative of cosine pi x. Now, I like to be very systematic about this and just kind of take a moment and think about what the derivative of cosine pi x is. All right, so let's forget about all this outer function and everything, and let's just look at this derivative of cosine pi x. All right, so the first thing to notice is that you have parentheses, and when we have parentheses, we have an inner and an outer function here. So the outer function is cosine, its derivative is negative sine. We're applying the chain rule here, so we keep the inner fixed, and then we multiply that by the derivative of the inner function. And the derivative of pi x, it's a linear term, so that will just be pi. Now, before we put this all together, let's move the trig function to the end. So this will become negative pi sine pi x. And we can put the parentheses, or we could drop the parentheses in that case. Now, the important thing to remember is that that's not our final answer, because we're multiplying that by 3 times cosine pi x quantity squared. So this 3 coefficient, this negative pi coefficient in front of the sign, those can be multiplied together to give us negative 3 pi, parentheses cosine pi x quantity squared times sine pi x. Now, I do want to talk about, this is a perfectly acceptable way to write your problem for your derivative, but you could also write this as negative 3 pi, and then this quantity squared could be written as cosine squared pi x. Because you have just one term as the argument, you could drop the parentheses. And then sine pi x, because it's just one term for the argument of the trig function, you could drop the parentheses there. So either of these are perfectly acceptable, and you want to be very flexible. You want to realize that this is the same thing as this expression with all the parentheses written there.